Hello and welcome to this week's Convex Conversation with me, journalist Helen Fospero. Today's guest is a senior aerospace executive at the cutting edge of the design and production of some of the world's first electric aeroplanes. She trained as a journalist, is a speaker, an angel investor, and was named one of America's top 100 national women in business to watch by bizwomen.com. Diane Simard is also a breast cancer survivor. She self-published a raw, honest, unapologetic, and at times funny book about her journey through the trials and triumphs of 10 months of treatment for stage 3 cancer, only to find a new self and purpose on the other side. Diane joins me from Colorado in America. Diane, you've been up to your eyes in snow. How is it there today?
Oh, everything's going great, Helen. Thank you so much. Doing very well. It's springtime in Colorado. It's my favorite time of year. It's just, there's so many exciting things going on.
The mountains must be stunning, are they, at this time?
They are. I'm looking out my window right now. And funny thing about Colorado is in the springtime in April, we get some of our heaviest snowstorms. So we're still wearing our snow boots, which can get a little frustrating. But all of a sudden, one day spring arrives and it just pops. It just explodes with green and leaves. And it's just wonderful.
Oh, I'm envious sitting in Shepherd's Bush of all that beautiful mountain air that you breathe. It must be so fresh.
It is. It's lovely.
So let's kick off, Diane, with your book, which I've read, The Unlikely Gift of Breast Cancer. What made you want to share your story that, as you warn very honestly on the back cover, isn't for the faint-hearted?
Honestly, Helen, I wrote this book. It actually was a response to the very cathartic experience I had with breast cancer and treatment. It was my way of healing, quite honestly, was to relive the whole experience from the day that I received the diagnosis, actually even before that, when I was having all these tests. And it's a year in the life of someone like me who's very driven, very organized, very passionate about executing on ideas, on concepts. I always say I'm the person behind the one who's out in front, who's making sure everything gets done. But this really was my therapy, was to write this book. I had journaled my experience. I'm trained as a journalist like you are, Helen. And I found so many people that I was corresponding with during my year with breast cancer were so interested in my perspective on this experience. A lot of meaning, a lot of comparison, a lot of education in terms of the different types of breast cancer, for example. And so as part of my rediscovering myself after this very traumatic experience, I had some signs from what I call my angels telling me to publish a book to tell your story. And so it really, truly was my way of healing.
That's lovely that it was your way of healing. And did you find that at the time, keeping notes and keeping that journal helped you?
It did. And the reason was because so very few people, even those who have experienced some type of cancer, the body and the mind especially has a way of just wanting to compartmentalize and quite possibly not ever talk about it again. People deal with this in different ways. And so I really couldn't find anyone to share my experience with. I'm a very deep thinker, very philosophical person, wondering why is this happening? Why did this happen? Why am I reacting this way? Why are people treating me so strangely? And so I confessed a lot of what I was experiencing and feeling in my journal. And it's my nature to not whine and complain. And I didn't want to put a lot of burden on my wonderful husband who was so supportive. And so it was my escape. And anytime I would feel overwhelmed or paranoid, these are very, very powerful drugs, as you can imagine, that they use to treat cancer. And it was just quite overwhelming as to how I was beginning to see the world differently. And I just wanted to capture that.
Can you take us back to that moment on February the 11th, 2015 at 10:45 when you got the phone call that, let's face it, Diane, all of us dread?
Yeah. It was at my desk in my office at work. And I looked down, I saw my phone was ringing, and I just knew. I have this sixth sense that I know many of us have. And I just knew, I just felt that it was just my time. And it was not about, oh, woe is me. why is this happening to me? It was, I have been chosen or selected to deal with this. And it's a test. And so even before I answered and talked to my primary care physician's nurse who called to tell me the news, I do what I always do. And I was trained as a journalist, but I've dealt more with crisis communications in my job, proactive. And I just was already gearing up for a fight, and not in the angry sense. It was in the, this is another problem. This is a test. This is probably likely going to be one of the ultimate tests of my life, is how am I going to deal with this? How am I going to set up a plan to try to survive this if I'm chosen as one of the fortunate ones who does get to survive their cancer? And so it was all about strategy for me. It was all about, okay, keep it straight. Don't let your emotions take over. And that was my attitude from the moment that I got the phone call.
I think what struck me, Diane, reading that particular passage is that being a very strong and very successful businesswoman, I think you thought you could tackle cancer in much the same way as a business challenge. And you had a meeting straight afterwards and you carried on with your meeting, but you found out cancer isn't like that. And you discovered that, didn't you, on this journey?
I did, and not in a particularly bad way. And this is where I think the tone and the content of my book is so relevant to the point that you're making, which is I wasn't angry. I wasn't just flustered and overwhelmed. It was, boy, I have never faced anything like this before. I think I'm pretty good at what I do, and I try to be a decent human being, but this is an incredible challenge. But I'm going to approach it with a really different attitude, with a positive attitude, with the intent of capturing this experience in a way that most people probably have never done before, and to present the experience in a way that just gets people thinking, quite honestly, because what I was finding is that it was testing me. And then because of my, again, training in journalism and public relations, I wanted to get in front of the message. There's like this rapid wildfire of bad news that spreads, and the C word, the cancer word, again, in my lifetime, when I was a child, it was basically a death sentence, quite honestly. And thanks to the incredible research, unfortunate number of people who've lost their lives to cancer, but have contributed to things like clinical trials so that we can gather data and continue to improve the treatment plans and options for all these different types of cancer. And they all require different treatments and protocols. I was just bound and determined to find meaning for not just why this happened to me, but to educate and to say, if you approach this from my life is going to change, but I'm going to be a changed person. I'm going to change my attitude and use this experience, which is exactly what I did, as a way to purge a lot of my emotional baggage, quite honestly. Dealt with a lot of stuff from my childhood, and I dealt with it not by just deciding to forgive. I started asking questions from living relatives about, gosh, why was my dad like this? My dad passed away now 30 years ago. And they would tell me stories I never even knew about my father. And I'll just tell a quick example. My father served in the Korean War, and he never talked about it like many war veterans do the same thing. But as it turned out, when I was about 5 years old, he developed post-traumatic stress disorder. And he went from being this loving, I'm daddy's little girl, I was always on his lap, and he had completely changed overnight. Spent 6 months in the psych ward at a veterans hospital and came home like a completely different person who wanted nothing to do with me. And we were just told as kids that, well, dad's depressed, and they made up words and excuses for what was happening to him. And he was heavily medicated, and, what's wrong with dad? He always keeps the blinds closed. And so I didn't put two and two together until talking to a cousin who spoke to her father, my uncle, and he explained, because he's got a background in counseling, and explained, your dad probably suffered from PTSD. We just didn't call it that then. And everything started to make sense. And it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't gone through cancer.
Do you think that's because you feel, when you have that diagnosis, that it might be a death sentence? And I suppose we're all going to die one day, and we don't tend to dwell on it. But when you have a diagnosis like that, it brings life and its fragility very much to the forefront, doesn't it? So is that why you think you started to explore things in your childhood and things in your past? because you weren't sure what the future was holding.
Absolutely. And pondering your mortality and being forced to by a disease that has the potential to just take over your body. I was just determined that, okay, and I was about to turn 50 when I was diagnosed. And I just decided, if I am given the opportunity to live, I'm going to live in peace, and I'm going to stop placing all these unrealistic expectations on myself. And I'm going to take the time to get answers to all these questions I've had in my life. And that's important to me. And I'm going to stop. I say this in the book, I'm going to stop trying to fix everybody. I was just so consumed with, it was my place in this world to make sure everybody else was happy. And what I didn't realize is that I was drowning in my own misery and agony and uncertainty, insecurities, and this whole process, literally the cleansing that you go through with chemotherapy. And I don't recommend it for anybody, but you're sick, nauseous, paranoid, all these things that happen to you. Man, I really took the time to write down what I was feeling, and it was healthy for me. It was really good for me. And I'm a better, clearer, clarified, driven, passionate person who now it's not a problem for me to just recognize instantly, here's somebody that's going to try to take something and not either pass it on or reciprocate. And I can pick those people out now, and it's okay. I just don't focus on them because it's not my job to change them.
The positivity, and we'll go on more to the unexpected gifts. And in fact, I think unexpected gifts, plural, as we go through the chat. But to use your words, chemo was a grueling trek. And again, using your words, I mean, little did you know it was going to give you the biggest ass kicking of your life. It's not really something anybody wants to go through. And I found it, I cried through your bits on chemo, and I sat there quite blessed, Diane, that I'm not going through it. It was quite hard to read. She says getting completely choked up, but it was hardcore reading. It really was. How did you get through all of that?
One day at a time. And it's really interesting because nausea is really hard for me. And nausea was just feeling sick. Well, really, quite honestly, it's like being hungover for 5 months straight, like the worst hangover you've ever had. There's just no relief from it. You're just, oh. And that's when I think the psychological piece of this starts to take over, is that, I'm going to feel like this for 5 more months. And I just got really depressed. And the cyclical nature of chemotherapy, I had 16 chemo infusions and lost my hair and the whole bit. But it was just knowing that I would feel kind of okay for 2 days before my next chemo infusion. And then just knowing that 24 hours from now, I'm going to be miserable. And they give you drugs for that after they give you the drugs that almost kill you, that are intended to kill. It's just, and you just feel like a pincushion. You just feel like this innocent animal. But it was really the depression. And once I realized that, okay, train yourself to expect to not feel good, but look forward to the days. And this is where the journaling really started to help me, was to say, someday maybe I'll do something with all of this effort. Maybe someday would want to read about this. And it was that hope and that just thinking about the future that really got me through it. Because there is nothing that you can do to make it. I wish I could have just fallen asleep for 5 months. But I often say it's good to go through trying times like that, because it makes you appreciate what a miracle the human body is. But also, I'm so much more obsessed now and appreciate the food, the fuel that I put in my body, getting sleep and plenty of exercise, and focusing on surrounding myself with healthy, strong, positive people.
One of the gifts you've definitely give to somebody else, like me, who's one of your readers, is that having gone through that very emotional and traumatic and at times really disturbing journey with you, is to sit with you today and see you the other side, dynamic, fabulous businesswoman, and to know that there is life the other side, providing it goes well. That's something I took from it, that there you are, vibrant and lively and seeing life in a different way. There is the other side of it for many people, isn't there?
Thank you. And you really have to work at it. But also, I'll have to say the book really, truly was my therapy. And instead of seeing a counselor, I wrote the book exactly a year after I experienced what I was writing about. And these triggers, what happens to your brain after you're finished, or you are finished with such a traumatic experience, is you're so sensitive to those memories and thoughts and smells. And in this case, writing about it a year later, the human body, your brain is so powerful. As I was writing about what chemo was like one morning, and I would write in the mornings before I went to work, I had to run to the bathroom to try to get sick. I wasn't sick. It was just recalling what it was like to be sick from chemo. Powerful. But my point is, I do think it's healthy is not the right word, but it's part of the healing to go back and address and to acknowledge and accept, and then find a place for it, and to say, I am compassionate. I have so much compassion for anyone who's going through this right now. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it or make it easy. And Helen, my book doesn't do that. I wasn't trying to gross anybody out. This is what it's really like. Most people don't write about that. In fact, I tried to find books that were honest about what it feels like to experience breast cancer. I couldn't find any, because much of it is sugar-coated and eat this, don't eat that, and, be very positive about it. No, this experience is awful. It sucks. It's really hard. However, here's how I dealt with it. And I'm not saying you should do the same thing too if you get the diagnosis. I'm just sharing and being honest about what worked finally for me.
I loved how positive you tried to be, because before the cancer, there were pictures of you with long, luscious brunette hair, and then came that awful moment when you knew that you're going to lose your hair. And, for women, I think that's quite hard, isn't it? Perhaps it sounds trivial, but I don't think it is trivial. I think that's part of who we are, isn't it? And that was another step in this awful journey. But I loved the way that you always tried to see the positive, and you put a line in about, so I worked out how much money I would save on blow dries, and you did, where possible, try and find a glimmer of light in all the difficult moments.
Yeah. And humor was, and that's where, as you mentioned, there's funny parts. It's funny because of how my brain thinks. Once I was talking with my medical oncologist, and she explained in 2015 in the United States, cold cap therapy was very new. And it had been as a way to preserve your hair so that you don't lose it all during the type of chemotherapy that I had at the time. She said, Diane, cold cap therapy is an option. You might be able to keep some of your hair, but it's very painful. And she talked to me about the effects of that. She said, we don't know yet, because we're not really tracking the data yet, whether or not cancer cells could still hang out in your scalp if you're not losing your hair. And I'm like, nope, then it's not for me, because I didn't want to go through this again. But to your point, I was like, God, I've spent so much money on this hair, coloring it and all of that. And now it's just down the tubes, and I'm going to have to start all over again. But for me, it's just one of those lucky things, I guess, because I've got a lot of long-term effects from having to shut off my estrogen, because my breast cancer was the type that's fed by estrogen. So I have a lot of aches in my feet. I can't wear high heels. But I have great hair now. The hair came back. It's fuller. It holds a curl. And, it's just weird things like that. And it typically doesn't happen, but you just make light of it. I'm just so thrilled to be alive, to get to meet amazing other women, journalists like yourself, for example. Just what a wonderful gift that I continue to receive as a result of this awful experience. I'm just so blessed. I am so focused on what they call psycho-oncology, which is the study, the addressing the impact that these traumatic health experiences have on your brain and your memories, because oftentimes there's still many survivors of any types of cancer who are still traumatized, who are struggling with PTSD, who are struggling to get their lives back, to redefine who they are, because they've just been so troubled and traumatized by this experience.
Well, 2 weeks after chemo ended, you did something about that. I mean, how frustrated were you by that lack of tailored mental health support? And tell us what you did.
I was going through this pretty bad bout with depression during the chemo phase, and my treatment consisted of chemotherapy first, followed by surgery, lumpectomy surgery, and then 33 bouts of radiotherapy, as you call it. And during chemo, I approached my medical oncologist and I said, hey, I think I'm losing it. I'm inside my own head. I'm just depressed. I just don't know if I can keep going forward. And the fact that I'm this type A data-driven person, I want to believe I'm in control, and I know I'm not. And what can you help me? And she goes, I don't know of anybody. Go to our breast cancer support group. And I go, nope, not a group person. And I said, seriously, we have family therapists, marriage and family therapists. Heck, we've got sports psychologists. Why don't we have cancer psychologists? She goes, well, I think they exist. I just don't know who they are. So then I started asking people, being a journalist and well connected. And I just kind of stumbled upon the fact that for whatever reason, not a lot of attention and resources have been put toward the psychological impact that cancer has on an individual. I think the assumption is, okay, if you're fortunate enough to survive cancer and lucky enough to survive treatment, you're healed, you're cancer free, you're in remission, you're whatever. And boom, life goes on. It does not happen that way. Statistics show much of the depression and the trauma emerges after treatment ends, such that it often peaks about 6 months after treatment's over, and it continues on. Some studies have shown that by 4 years after treatment ends, typically the worst of it is over, but sometimes it's not. And I was just really concerned about that because, again, you get through the treatment and they know it's known what to do, sort of to treat the body, but we're not treating the mind. And much like we're seeing with the mental health consequences or issues or aftermath as we continue to deal with what COVID has done to the world, the mental health impact is really emerging. And so cancer's been around a long, long time. And people are suffering from PTSD from this. And so what I did finally after chemo ended and I was somewhat functional is I began to have schedule meetings with actually psychology professionals, and found that no university in this country, in America, was offering this type of what they call psycho-oncology or psychosocial oncology training at the graduate level. Many psychologists and other therapists do work with cancer patients and their caregivers, but they receive their training in how to work with cancer patients. And what's so unique and specialized about cancer, which is such a complex disease, they often received it after their formal training, education. And so I founded a specialty at the University of Denver that was at the time the first in the country to offer this type of specialized training while these licensed psychologists, these are clinical psychologists, while they were still in school.
That's extraordinary. And what difference do you think it makes to patients going through it, Diane?
What I've heard is that there is a need for cancer patients and their caregivers, but especially those going through this experience. And then once they are finished with their formal treatment, there's just a need to be heard and understood. Man, everybody was trying to tell me what I should think and feel. People that knew nothing about cancer were trying to tell me what to do, what I should do, because everybody wants to help. It's human nature, right? But some of them just would talk at me and they wouldn't listen. All I wanted was for somebody to say, how are you feeling? What is it like? What's it like to have to carry around this port in your body? The symbolism of that. What's it like to be bald? To lose all the hair in your body, to have no nose hair? What happens? Nobody asked me those kinds of questions. They just were like, oh, don't get too close to me. I might catch cancer, you know? I mean, it's scary. It's scary to be around someone with cancer. I get that. But I was so impassioned. I'm still so passionate about trying to help others understand what this experience really is about and what it's like.
And can you roll the COPE training out across the states and potentially, I know you have no boundaries, Diane, as a businesswoman, you know, potentially globally?
So this specialty that was founded at the University of Denver is called the Center for Oncology Psychology Excellence, or COPE. And it's a combination of classroom training, if you will, and then there's a clinical element to it. COPE students actually do work at the COPE clinic with patients and caregivers, and they're offering telehealth now, of course, which is fabulous. I'm on my third really, effort. One is a nonprofit here in the Denver area called the Ray of Hope Cancer Foundation, and they're working on a pilot therapy program. They offer grants to newly diagnosed Colorado residents who are needing funds to pay for groceries and the mortgage, the house payment, the rent, because now they have to pay for treatment. And so we're going to be working together to offer a grant program for them to receive therapy, quite honestly, individual therapy. This is not group therapy, but I strongly believe we need to be treated as individuals because we're not all wired the same. We're just not. Typically, cancer is treated for a host of reasons pretty consistently with the same drugs and such, but we all have past traumas. We have different body chemistries. For some, there's not much, if any, psychological trauma. For some, it gets worse the longer they get away from their formal treatment because they're so fearful of recurrence that cancer could come back. I'm committed and passionate about working with my alma mater, for example, wants to set up a certificate program to offer this training in an online format. And so my thing is I just get people together, get people talking. I meet wonderful people like you, Helen, and the podcast that you give and serve others to just say, we're bringing attention to this. Who all can we get together to have more of an impact and improve this process?
So when people pick up your book, Diane, and they see the title, The Unexpected Gift, for me, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's plural because I can see lots of gifts in a way, having spoken to you and having read the book. But how do you sum it up? If somebody asks you why that title, what is the unexpected gift for you?
Breast cancer actually provided me with the gift of clarity, finding my own voice, quite honestly. I was convinced my mission in life was to always prop up someone else and to make other people look good, to write the words that were going to make them spew and say and claim as their own. And it allowed me to truly discover who I am and to find myself. And there are some unpleasant parts. I didn't purposely make the parts unpleasant just to, add shock value. It really happened, but it was important for me to face the bad so that I could find the good and discover myself, my true self, and I wouldn't say outspoken. I'm just passionate, but I'm also really clear on what matters to me. And that's a wonderful gift. I did not expect that to happen as a result of breast cancer, but it did.
We must give a little mention to your wonderful husband, Rennie, who was in the background and was your rock, wasn't he, through this?
He was just a wonderful pillar of support. And he wasn't there telling me what to do. He was there asking the questions, saying, whatever you need, however I can do, if I need to just be silent. He was just so wonderful. But he was one of those listeners, quite honestly, that I speak of. And he started to see this side of me that was very, not very outspoken, but honest. I would complain a little bit and just say, this is just not pleasant. And I'll get through it. I just need someone to understand how hard it is. And he was very frightened. This is hard to watch, to see someone. And I was, again, one of the fortunate ones that was likely going to survive. If I survived treatment, I likely was going to survive my cancer. Often that's not the case. But to go through an experience together like that, and we have a wonderful relationship, but it added this new element. And our friends and others just witnessed and observed the grace or the process. And then for me to write about it and then tell the world about it, it's been done before, certainly, but just not in the way that's problem solving or presenting solutions or how we can do this process better. That was different.
Throughout your treatment, you continued working as much as possible at Bye Aerospace, where you're on the board. Tell me a bit about the founder, George Bye, and the beautiful electric aircraft he's designing.
One of the things that I did early in my career was develop an eye for businesses that had the opportunity to be very successful. And it was actually in a previous marriage. My ex-husband had started a company that was providing information technology services to our federal government. And I went into business with him, and we sold the company in 2004 and then got divorced soon after. But it was a struggling company, and thanks to a lot of people's help, we turned it around and had a very successful exit. And I thought that was pretty cool. But one of the things I did... It was a pretty successful exit, wasn't it, Diane?
It was a large figure exit.
Yeah, it was. One of the things I did was I started to do angel investing. And as an amateur, quite honestly, I didn't know what I was doing. But one of the companies I invested in is this company called Bye Aerospace. And the founder and our CEO and my business partner and good friend is George Bye. And I met George in the summer of 2008, right before the last economy, meltdown. And I invested in the company. And what I liked about George was the fact that he was very passionate about bringing clean energy to aviation and in the manner in which we're doing it. One of the things that we're doing now, 13 years later, is we have prototypes and we are pursuing certification, which allows us to begin producing a 2-seat electric airplane called the E-Flyer 2. We announced an 8-seat electric airplane called the E-Flyer 800. And much like electric cars and other ground transportation, aviation is just beginning to have its moment when it comes to the possibility of becoming electric and the benefits that come along with that. So I've been involved with this company, and I'm not an aviator and a pilot. Airplanes are cool. I just have been so driven about being the one that hangs in there and says, this is a revolution that's coming, really. It's going to change everything. And it is. And we're in the early days of that. It's so exciting. And much like my belief in psycho-oncology, I wouldn't say I start things, but where I tend to excel is I just don't give up, and I keep educating and talking about it however I can. And we get that momentum going. And we're really just at that inflection point for electric aviation. It's such an exciting time, and it's so great to be a part of that. But I wear many hats, Helen, as you know. And again, behind the scenes, just poised and ready to say, yeah, now is our moment. Now is our time. What's next? What comes next, you know?
Well, of course, the electric flying, it's sustainable. It makes flying more accessible to all. It's cheaper, and without stealing any thunder, because as you know, George has very kindly agreed to guest on the podcast. But just tell us a little bit about him, because aviation is absolutely in his DNA, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I rarely meet people who absolutely live their passion, and George Bye does. And it's something to be celebrated. Whereas me, I kind of bounce around and I need a lot of variety in my life. He lives for aviation, and he had a chance to take a ride in a Tesla in the early 1990s, I think it was. Anyway, it was a test model for the Roadster. And he has ever since thought in his mind, we've got to be able to do this for aviation, to make airplanes electric. And so he's been driven ever since that experience. It's his passion. It's his life. He eats and breathes this. And he's such a well-versed, well-schooled, well-studied individual. I have so much respect for him, but he's also just a great person. You feel like you're talking to your best friend. He's driven and passionate, but he's tenacious. And I admire that about him. This has not been easy. We've been at this, I wouldn't say a long time, but we've needed to be consistent and remain on message and confident that this can happen. And because it's happening, it's going to happen.
It's happening, but there were also, a few years ago, there were many cynics out there, weren't there?
Oh, gosh. Oh, I can't tell you how many times he and I and others in our company were presenting. He was briefing, and people were in the audience were just shaking their head, laughing, getting up and leaving, behaving quite rudely. You know, they're like, this will never happen, and you're crazy. And okay, just stick around. And it's that tenacity. It's just that believing somebody's going to do this. It should be us. But again, now it's almost, I wouldn't say overwhelming. It's just, we have a company to run. And there's just so many people that have so many great ideas now about what all needs to be done. There is much to be done. This is going to take some time for this revolution to take place, but the positive impact and the fact that we now have solutions for cleaner, greener flight, that's what's so important.
I think what's lovely as well is that he's flown since the age of 8. He has a very impressive background, both in the US military and commercial flying as a pilot. But his passion just shines through, and you look at the aircraft itself and it's a stunning piece of design. It makes you want to go and fly it somehow.
He has an eye for beautiful things. And much of that comes from the fact that his mother is a watercolor artist, and made sure that George was trained in things like architecture and design, efficiency. The thing with an airplane, like anything, is to make it as efficient, as user-friendly, to compare it to technology. How user-friendly can this be? To put yourself in the position of the user and make, if it's an airplane or a computer or a new piece of technology, to make that as positive of an experience, as pleasant of an experience as you could possibly make it. We're paying really close attention to that user experience. And that's not often done in the aviation industry, quite honestly.
Oh, that's very exciting times. Diana, as a businesswoman, you talk in the book a bit, you've made mistakes, you've had some disappointments. What have been the biggest lessons from the business side that you've learned? And what would you say maybe to your younger self?
All those mistakes they're just learning experiences. And I would love, if I could do nothing but go and find great stories, I would love to go and talk to entrepreneurs, inventors, scientists about, call them mistakes, but not everything's going to be successful, and that's okay. And to have that attitude, as long as you're not hurting people, it takes money. It costs some money, and sometimes ideas just don't work. I've had a lot of that. I've experienced that firsthand. I've almost completely forgiven myself for that. I don't see it. I just call it expensive lessons. And that's life. I mean, if we did everything perfectly, we would never get anything done. And so it contributes to great stories. What I've seen in watching other people fail their businesses, it's really hard to watch, but that's how you learn. And so my advice would be to stick with it. It's just part of the experience. And don't assume that all these people that are making all this kinds of money, what they don't talk about when they get interviewed in all these business magazines, how many times did they fail? How much money did they lose to get to this point?
I think it's like Breaking Bad, isn't it? Didn't the makers of Breaking Bad take it to 39 different people and they kept getting no. They were completely addicted.
Exactly.
You said, Diane, that you flip around a bit and you're interested in lots of different things. Do you find now with electric flying and the journey that you're on at Bye Aerospace that this satiates you every day and is enough now, or are there other things on the horizon?
Well, fortunately, George understands that I am forever changed, and I've never been one to just get up and go to the office, call it a day, come home, watch a little television, and no, it's not even enough. It's so cool. But part of my gift that I honor and being given the gift of life of surviving my cancer is to continue to give back. And so depending on what's on the calendar for the day, I'm almost every day in touch with other survivors, someone who's reaching out that wants to make a connection. I'm very active on LinkedIn just because whether it's other survivors or those that want to learn more or are looking for a resource, that's what fills my soul, quite honestly. There's the business aspect and what I do for my job, and just amazing, amazing colleagues and people that are helping us do what we do at Bye Aerospace. But I will forever be not obligated. This is a privilege to be chosen to live, quite honestly. And I'm going to honor that every day. And I'm going to honor that by taking care of myself finally, better than I ever have, interacting, having conversations with wonderful people like you, and just pressing forward with the fact that life isn't over and it's just begun, really. And how much more can I fit into a day? But I'm going to celebrate and enjoy those who are there for me and who reach out, the young people who are looking for their first break. I've been there and I want to help with that, but I'm not going to give that to them. The experience is what is so important. It's such a critical part of this whole process of defining, of redefining, of trying this, of charting a new course, trying new things. It shouldn't be handed to us. The process is just so important.
And my final question, Diane, to you, looking at you on our Zoom call from America, is how are you and how are you feeling now? And do you feel well?
I do. Thank you. I am one of the blessed ones who, with my type of breast cancer, I stayed on these anti-estrogen drugs for 5 years. And the benefit from that is that it greatly reduces, and again, statistically reduces the likelihood that my type of breast cancer would recur because we were, quote unquote, shutting off the estrogen, the fuel, if you will. But the effects of that were, I was very lethargic and tired and achy, dizzy. And there's actually a test that showed I had a 0% benefit from staying on this drug beyond 5 years. And so I got to go off of it in November and had a little champagne celebration for that. And I have to tell you, at age 55 and a half, this is the first time since I can't remember, I'm on no medication. I'm just really listening to my body, trying to not be so clumsy and injure myself. I'm prone to do that. And when something hurts, I stop doing it. It's pretty basic. And I just feel great. I feel blessed. I'm very selective and very protective, but my tolerance is different. And I'm just focused on just living and being happy and being there if anybody reaches out and needs to be heard.
It's been fantastic to talk to you today, Diane.
Oh,
and
thank
you for the gift you gave me. I think if you read a book like yours, you do give something. You give a real understanding of what people are going through and a sense that there really is light at the end of the tunnel for so many people who find themselves in the situation you did. I knew it would be a joy speaking to you, and thank you for getting up nice and early and doing it for us.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime. Best wishes to you. Thank you for what you do. It's just such an honor to have met you and to keep in touch with you. And thank you for following Bye Aerospace and for recommending my book. I'm just so grateful. And I just wish everyone out there happiness and healthy lives.
Bye Aerospace. I hope I'm going to be flying one of your e-flyers one day. That's my mission.
Absolutely.
Zero to hero, but solo in one of your e-flyer 2s, I think. I'm not sure about the 8-seater. I think the 2-seater to begin with. Thank you so much, Diane. You've been listening to Diane Simard, a director of Bye Aerospace and author of The Unlikely Gift of Breast Cancer. It's been a pleasure to have your company today. Thank you very much for listening. You can download and subscribe to our whole series of inspirational chats at convex.podbean.com or search The Convex Conversation on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, or simply ask Alexa. I'll be back next week. Bye for now.